Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Christy McDonald. In just a few days, most public school kids will be heading back to the classroom after a nice long summer break. I have 3 children. They're ready to go back. But this week also marked the release of the state standardized test scores that weren't too promising in many places. Now, you may not have kids in school, but how our state educates kids and how they may or may not achieve has a large impact on our long-term success and growth as a state. So we are taking a look at the MSTEP results, what they really mean. What are some of the biggest problems our state is facing in trying to close the achievement gap? Plus the push against the state reform office taking over academics in struggling districts. And we'll specifically zero in on Detroit Public Schools, what the city is doing to fix building conditions there, plus what has to happen during this school year for DPS to continue to be a viable district. We are tackling all of that tonight with an education roundtable. Now, some of our guests have been here before, others are new to MiWeek. Of course, our MiWeek contributor, Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press is here. It's good to see you, Stephen. Nolan Finley is off tonight. And also joining us is Chastity Pratt-Dawsey. She is a reporter for Bridge Magazine. Welcome back to MiWeek, Chastity.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. And also Ken Whipple. He's the former CEO of CMS Energy, now the chairman of Michigan Achieves, which is an initiative of the Education Trust Midwest. You also may recognize him from working on Detroit's Financial Advisory Board. Ken, welcome to MiWeek. It's good to have you here. Yeah. And finally, Erin Einhorn. She is the editor of Chalkbeak Detroit, which is a nonprofit news organization covering schools around the country. And Erin, this is your first time on MiWeek. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So we have everybody locked in and ready for school to start next week. And so as we begin our discussion, and I ticked off a lot of points that I'd like to cover tonight, a lot of discussion points. But I'd love to get from each one of you as we start off an overview of how you think we're situated here with education in the state of Michigan and some of the challenges that we're facing. And Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're in a bad space. We don't spend as much as we should on education. We don't have the systems of accountability in place that we should for schools and teachers, the supports that teachers need. And if you look at where we are and sort of the comparison between us and other states, you know, we used to be a top 10 state in education. Now we're sort of middle of the pack, and I think that's because of all of those things. We have not kept our sort of focus where it should be, or our commitment where it should be, to make sure that we have great public schools available for everybody in the state.
And some studies and results have shown that we could take a significant slide in the next 10 to 15 years if we don't do something to change it. Chastity, let me get your input on where you think we are. Give me a general feel of where you think we are in Michigan right now.
There's no doubt we're a bottom 10 state in all the indices. And you know, like Stephen was saying, we don't put the effort in to make the schools better. I mean, really, school reform takes reform of your finances, reform of what happens in the classroom, reform of how you educate and train your teachers. And that's what we need here, true reform from top to bottom. And everyone has to get on the same accord, on the same playbook, and stick to a plan of action. We've not seen that in Michigan.
All right, Ken, and you're working to make Michigan a top 10 state when it comes to education again. So what are your thoughts on an overview?
I think we know what to do when you look around at some of the states that are cleaning our clock in education, but we can't bring ourselves to do it. And it's not only the money and the things that go on in the schools like others have mentioned here, it's the fact that from a governance standpoint, we really have kind of a screwy situation. In Massachusetts, for example, head and shoulders the best state in the country on K-12 education. It's the governor's responsibility. The Board of Education reports to him, the Chief Education Officer reports to him. In Michigan, we've got this fragmented thing where the Board of Education is elected. Most voters don't pay a whole lot of attention to that. We have a state superintendent. None of those report to the governor or have anything to the governor. So I love Brian Whiston, the state superintendent. He's a good guy, and he set the right objective. He wants Michigan to be a top 10 state. But the way we're organized, he doesn't have a chance, in my view, to succeed.
All right, so it's a governance issue. I want to talk about that as well in the state reform office. Erin, go ahead and give us what your thoughts are.
I mean, what I think what is most concerning to me is not just that the state is so far behind on all the different indices, and not just test scores, obviously a lot of other ways of measuring schools. Michigan is not where it used to be. I don't know that I would be quite as alarmed by it if I saw a real plan. But I don't see a plan. I see, you know, a lot of people pointing fingers saying, oh no, well, we can't do that and we can't do that. A lot of people are against a lot of things. But even, you know, when the test scores came out the other day, one of the comments from a state official is, well, we're really going to look at this and we're going to come up with a solution. And I was like, oh, you're going to look at it.
When?
Not only is there not a plan, there's no discussion of creating a plan.
Well, and that solution for some people says, well, how about we change the test? So let's jump into that and talk about how we saw the MSTEP results. Now, the MSTEP, for people who aren't totally familiar, replaced the MEP test, which is a standardized test in the state of Michigan. And so this is the second year that it's been given. And so when these results came out this week that weren't very good. I mean, they were flat in English, they were flat in math, they were up a little bit in science, and they were down a little bit in social studies. What is the significance of seeing these results? And Stephen, let me start with you. Why should we care so much in the second year of a test like this?
Well, I mean, it's a yardstick. It's part of the yardstick, right? Here's where you are. Here's where you measure up against the standards that we've agreed are going to be the standards for testing in the state. And, it's an important tool for people who plan curriculum and instruction to say, all right, well, to get to this point, we've got to do these things. But I do agree that, you can't read too much into it because it is the second year. It is a harder test than the test we were administering before. It's calibrated to an entirely different set of standards. So kids are not supposed to be doing that well on it now. It's about how they progress over time. And our problem in Michigan, of course, has been the impatience of not wanting to wait to see how well things turn out. And people say, well, this test is too hard, or it's not measuring the right thing, so let's go do something else and then start all over again. What I hope happens is that we say, look, consistency is the most important thing in testing over time. Let's stick with this, see how we can sort of move people up the ladder.
Why shouldn't we get rid of this, Ken?
We should not get rid of this. It's an incredible tool to help teachers know what to focus on.
It's interesting. You wrote something this week and you said, it's all about being honest about how we are doing and not being afraid of what the data tells us.
Well, exactly. And we knew it was not going to be good. But if you're a teacher, wouldn't you want to, or a parent, wouldn't you want to know how your kids stack up to schools across the state, as to how they stack up on other states? Because ultimately, these kids are going to have to compete with kids not only in America, but around the world. And not to want to know where we stand, I think is awful. It's kind of like if you get a bad report card and the response should be, well, we ought to make the grading standards easier. It's silly, I think.
Well, I don't think that the calls to change the MSTEP or get rid of the MSTEP are necessarily about like, oh, we're getting bad grades, let's get rid of the graders. I think not just in Michigan, but across the country, there's a lot of conversation around this model we've been using in this country for decades, where we're going to test the kids once a year and draw all kinds of conclusions from that. And in fact, the technology has advanced in such a way that you can now test children throughout the year, and a lot of schools and a lot of teachers are using tests like that are going to give teachers feedback throughout the year. So, that child is, not just getting, 30% or whatever the score is, but is deficient in the following skills and things like that. And then that teacher can then work with that child on those skills. So I think the conversation around if you did replace the MSTEP, is there another kind of test that would be able to be a teaching tool that teachers could use throughout the year?
You know what, though?
Is it the best way to measure our kids' achievement?
We've always measured achievement, whether it's a spelling test or whatever
And
it is.
don't you have to?
And let's be for real. Who complains about a test? People who don't do well on it. If we were doing very well on this test, there would be no debate over whether we should keep it.
Well,
or
I
not
got an
keep
A.
it.
I don't know about you people.
Exactly. And so it's the great debate about testing, to test or not to test, how much to test, what's the value of the test, who should be tested, who shouldn't be tested. And the bottom line is, we have this test. It is aligned to national standards. It is a hard test. Do we want our students to be able to master a difficult test, a rigorous test, or not? That's the bottom line.
I think what people are talking about now, though, is because this test is being used as a marker for schools.
Absolutely.
And a marker for schools and whether those schools are going to be shut down, because we see now from the State School Reform Office saying, we have the power, we haven't used it, but now we're going to be looking at this list, which is going to be coming out very soon, of the schools who are going to be in the bottom 5%. And now it's saying, well, if you haven't achieved in the last 3 years, you're going to be shut down, which starts a whole other set of conversations.
But you know
Ken.
what's missing from that conversation? There is a part of the law that says if the school reform office shuts down your school, it can be reopened as something new and different and better. So that part of the conversation needs to be, you know, brought up. If the school reform office closes a school in Detroit, School A, it can be reopened. It'll be called School B, and you know, have a new
but it'll be the
teaching
same
staff.
place
It'll be the
with new
same.
teachers
So
and that.
closing is a buzzword in Detroit that really gets emotional because we've seen 160 schools like close. They're never opening again. But when the school reform office talks about close, it can be reopened. So that's something that needs to be discussed and really clarified with the public. Closed doesn't mean closed as we know it in this sense.
Yeah, that makes it a lot easier for parents particularly. But you know, you stand way back and you say, who wants persistently bad schools to stay persistently bad? Nobody. And if closing in parentheses is a way to do that and reopen the school with new teachers and new management and all that, that's terrific.
So is it just new teachers, new management? I guess I would love to see that playbook when we say we close this school, but this is what we do. Then what? Does it reopen in 3 months? And how is that any much different? Do you know what I'm saying? It's almost maybe in terms of details that people need to see, Erin.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but I think, I think that one part of the conversation is, does that school get replaced with another public school? Does it get replaced with a charter school? And I think there's a lot of devil in those details as far as, you know, I mean, obviously teachers unions are very interested in that. Parents are going to be very interested in that. So, you know, I think if you're going to close a school, and closing a school is, you know, extremely disruptive, even if you open up another school in there, because probably most likely the teachers who were there, the teachers the children have relationships with, you know, especially children with special needs might really, you know, they need consistency year after year. So when you close a school, even if you reopen something in there, you know, you really have to think that through and make sure that all of the support systems that the children are relying on and that the community is relying on that school to provide, that something is there to replace it. So we can't just close schools. We actually need to think, you know, thoughtfully about what is the school system we want to have and how do we get there?
It depends on the environment too, because there are places in Detroit that have way too many schools, and there's neighborhoods where are school deserts, and that's an impact also.
I mean, part of the problem here is this is the language and the narrative that we're working with here, right? There's this punitive sense of, well, that school failed, so it must close. I mean, think about those two words and how if you were a teacher or a principal in those schools, how would you internalize that kind of language? We need to start talking about schools differently, that if it's underperforming, what is it that we do to move it to a place where it's performing better, not close? I mean, the idea of closing public schools is a really strange concept. Public schools are located in neighborhoods that often don't have other options, and the charter options that they may have tend to be, I think, opportunistic as opposed to focused on giving those kids what they need. We need to start talking about creating, like Erin said, creating the schools that we need in the places where we need them, and closing is probably not part of that vocabulary in the best sense of it. It's reconstitution or reconfiguring of schools. Again, dumping the support that they need into the building to move them forward.
And the question is, has closing a school ever done anything for the children who attend school in that area? We've closed 160 schools in Detroit. We've reconfigured 50 or 60 of them, reconstituted half the district. How has that, you know, shown any progress for the students and the educational system in Detroit? And it goes back to the question of, when is Michigan going to come up with a reform plan based on best practices? How do we know that closing and reconstituting these schools is going to work when it hasn't, especially in Detroit, worked to now?
Well,
That's really important, because having a plan, we talk about money, not enough money in the school. If we had a plan, a decent plan, money is not issue.
All right,
I
so Ken,
think we can
who's in
get
charge?
them?
Who's in charge of the plan? Who comes up with the plan and says, "This is it, folks. This is what we're going to do"?
That's a great question.
It's a team effort.
And for Detroit, I think that's one of the problems that we bypassed when we had all this legislation and didn't have the commission that said at least somebody ought to be looking at the interests of all the Detroit kids, the charter school kids and the public schools.
Well, let's talk about Detroit Public Schools right now, or the Detroit Public Schools Community District, which is now officially the new name of it since the legislature came through. Was it $670 million? Aaron, let me ask you. It just came out this week that the state says, well, the Reform Office said, well, it'll be 3 more years probably until any Detroit school could be on a list for closure. But what does the district face this year and going into this new school year? And what are some of the challenges that they're facing now?
I think it's the same challenges that they've been facing consistently, minus one, which was the debt.
Minus the
so
debt.
I mean, you know, it's a fresh start, and that's a big deal, right? So, you know, whereas last year, you know, a fairly large percentage of each dollar that the district received had to go straight to debt. Now that's not the case, but all the other problems, the enrollment is, you know, way lower than it needs to be. There's a teacher shortage. I think 200 teachers they're still trying to hire with school starting in just a couple of days. You know, they put a lot. They put $2.5 million into school renovation. So some of the you know, repair conditions that got a lot of headlines around the teacher sickouts last year. Some of that's been resolved. But there's still, I mean, you know, and the test scores come out and parents read, oh, well, they're getting, you know, like, what was it, 7% of DPS students were meeting standards in math, and parents have choices, and you know, a large percentage of Detroit parents are going to charters, are going to school of choice suburban districts, and you know, DPS, it's a new district, it's a new day, it's a fresh start, but there's still a lot of baggage and a lot of bad reputation that they're going to have to repair before they're going to convince families to return.
It's going to be interesting to see the enrollment numbers. Chastity?
Detroit Public Schools Community District is facing what it's faced for the past 17 years. Instability that has basically been put in place by state policies. Parents who don't know what's going to happen today, tomorrow, who's in charge, or who's going to make what decisions. What is this new school board? What will they do? What's this commission? It's instability, inconsistency, and it totally undermines the classroom, the teaching, and the future. And again, Detroit parents and teachers have gone through this for the past 17 years. So even though there's new legislation, a new name, there's still the same instability.
Ken, what do you think?
Exactly. They don't have the debt, as you said a minute ago, but I think they're faced with exactly the same thing. We have inexperienced teachers, 38 kids in a classroom. We can pay the bills for a while. I think the outlook is not good unless we do some of the things that we've been talking about here. Even if we did it on a pick one at a time, just as an example, some of the states, other than Massachusetts, that have made great process, have said, okay, we're going to focus on an important thing, teacher quality, helping the teachers be better teachers. Tennessee, which passed Michigan in the last 10 years, took 1,000 of the best veteran teachers and made them into full-time coaches. It's unfair to take a young kid from Eastern Michigan and put him in a classroom of second graders, 38 kids in the class. We are never going to succeed unless we focus on some things like that. Teacher quality is just one of many things that we've mentioned.
Stephen, I'm going to give you the last word here on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this district will be back in front of the state within, I don't know, 18, 24 months with the same financial problems that it had before because the enrollment, you know, we all know that enrollment dips typically the year after a work stoppage in schools. We had one last year, so the projections, I think, that they used to set up this district are probably off. So we're gonna open school sort of digging the hole back that we just got out of. And it's really not fair. I mean, I think it's a very sort of cynical ploy to sort of set them up without the tools to succeed, and then they will be blamed for failing. The new school board, the new superintendent will be tarred and feathered for not succeeding.
Well, this is just the beginning of, I think, what is going to be an ongoing conversation here in the state of Michigan, and I'm glad that you could be here with us today. Aaron Einhorn from Chalkbeat Detroit, thanks so much. Ken Whipple from Michigan Achieves.
Yes.
All right, thanks so much for coming in. And Chastity Pratt-Dawsey, you can read her in Bridge Magazine. Thanks, Chastity. It's always good to see you.
Thanks.
All right, we want to let you know to mark your calendars for a live MiWeek on the road. We will be in Detroit Thursday, September 22nd for a full-hour live show devoted to education.